Hello, it's Miss Bierman, and today I'm going to show you how to glaze a test tile. We are using cone 6 white clay that's been fired to cone 04. We call this bisque ware. And here is an example of a completed glazed test tile. So this one has one layer, this one has 2 layers, and this one has 3 layers. So you can get an idea of how the amount of glaze you add can make the color more saturated or vibrant. We're going to do something a little different where we overlap some glazes. So this is just one type of glaze, but on this test tile, I'm going to do some overlapping with the Sky Celadon and the Marigold Celadon. So the glazes we're using are called Celadons, but they come in a variety of colors. So for tools, I've got my glazes, I've got some paper and something to write with. And I've got my bisque tile and some paper towels and my brush. These are the best brushes, I think, for glazing. However, I'm not sure we have very many. So the main point of your brush is that it's got very soft bristles. So these types of brushes with the bamboo handle are similar to this one. You can see how soft that is. So I'm going to use this Sky, and first I'm going to get it wet, but then I'm going to wipe the excess water out. The glaze needs to be shaken, but if you have the lid partially open, it's going to create a big problem. I've done it before. So there's the Marigold, and this is the Sky. Now these glazes do not look like this when they come out of the kiln. This is why we do test tiles. So if your test tile is a little dusty, the dust can kind of create little irregularities on your glaze. So very, very damp. You don't want this to be soaking wet at all. You can give it a wipe, and you don't want to get it super wet, because if you saturate this bisqueware with water, which is porous, it'll be too wet and your glaze won't dry very quickly. I'm going to start with the lighter color, and your glaze should be a consistency that is similar to, I'd say, cream, but maybe just a little bit thicker. So it is to be somewhat thick, and I do load my brush. So when you load your brush, it means that you've got quite a bit of whatever you're using in the bristles. So now I'm going to make 3 lines, but I'm going to dip my brush each time to get more glaze loaded. So here's a loaded brush. So here's my next one. The glaze that I put on is fairly thick. I am going to dab in there a little because of the texture. I'm not pressing hard with my brush. I'm just gliding it over the top. So now you can see it starting to dry. So we need to allow this to dry before we do anything else. So in the meantime, I'm going to wash my brush. And as I said before, too much water is not great for glazing. So I'm going to make sure that I dry my brush off, blot it. You can see somewhere, here's the water that I blotted out. So once this is dry, I can do layer 2 and layer 3. And then with the Sky, once the whole thing is dry, I'm going to make some vertical lines, and that will show us what happens when the glaze is overlapped. There's a lot of different things can happen when glazes overlap, but these Celadon Cone 5-6 glazes are designed to overlap and blend pretty well. I'm going to let that dry and take a little pause here. The test tile here, one layer, one layer, one layer, and it's all dry. It's so important to let it dry in between layers. It takes a while sometimes. You can speed it up a little bit with a blow dryer if you have access to one. And so here's the reason you need your paper, because you have to make notes to remember what you did. So I drew out the tile, just a basic diagram. I added this here just because that's where my texture is. And then I'm going to put, what did I use? Marigold. And I'll just put a 1 for one layer, 2, and 3. So I know that that's what I've got. Maybe space them out a little more, something like that. So then you have 1, 2, and 3. So these are glaze notes. You do need your name and whatever class you're in, 8th, 7th, 6th, 5th, or 5A, whatever. I'm going to dip my soft brush. It's dry, so I'm going to dip it in a little water. It's always a good idea to get your bristles wet, but then you want to blot it. And now I'm going to get my brush loaded like so, and I'm going to add my glaze. That's layer 2. And you'll notice how much darker it looks when it's not dry, when it's wet. And I'm not pressing hard, I'm gliding over. Now, time to dry. All right, so at this point I have one layer here, I have 2 layers here, and I have 2 layers here. So I need to add a 3rd layer. I mentioned earlier that you could use a blow dryer to dry it. However, I realized that a fan is actually a better choice. So I have a fan, and I will put a board in front of it, and you can put your test tiles on the board while you are waiting for it to dry, and the fan should speed that up. So again, with my loaded brush, and now I'm adding that 3rd layer, like so. All right, so now I'm going to let this dry, and then we will move on to the next color of glaze. That way. 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers. There's a little spot there that's still wet. You can tell because it's a little darker. This is what the marigold will look like after it's been fired, and that's 3 coats, 2 coats, and 1 coat. So we are going to add another color vertically. I'm going to use the sky blue, which ends up looking like this, 3, 2, 1 coats. But I'm going to need to look at my glaze notes. So I've got the texture here. I've got 1, 2, and 3 marigold. And now for the sky, I'll go 1, 2, 3. But if your glaze isn't dry at all and you try to do your 2nd coat, it just wipes off the 1st coat. So here is, whoops, 1. And remember to load your brush and glide it over like so. So there's 1, 2, 3. This could very well take you 2 days because of the amount of drying that we need to do on the test tile. While you're waiting for things to dry, you can have your folder out and be working on whatever you have in there. We are ready for the 2nd and 3rd coat. One thing I wanted to mention too is you do have to keep track of how many coats you put on. Sometimes once it's dry, it's hard to tell. So if you ask me how many coats have I put on, I can't say that I know. I might be able to tell if it's thick or thin. So this is the marigold, that's 3 layers, that's 2, and that's 1. And so with the sky blue, I'm going to start here with 1, this will be 2, and that'll be 3. That's what I have in my notes here. Your notes may be different than mine. Mine are a little bit messy. So we're loading our brush up and we're doing the next 2. Now again, it has to dry. The final 3rd layer. So that's 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers. But I only have 2 on there right now, so I'm going to do the 3rd layer. And that is all I'm going to do to this test tile. However, as far as glazing, it still needs to go in the kiln. And this is the marigold and this is the sky blue. So what we're going to find out is what happens when the sky blue and the marigold are layered. And so you'll see, like over here where you have 3 layers of marigold and 3 layers of sky, it's going to be really, really thick. And that'll give us some information as well, because you can put on too much glaze and you can put on too little glaze. Have a good time glazing, and don't forget your notes, really important. I didn't write down sky, so I need to make sure to do that. And that's it. Have a great day.